everyone, welcome to my free lesson on solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So we're going to be looking at solving quadratics that look like this, and we're going to be using this method. This is what the completing the square method looks like. This is going to be probably a little bit of a longer video because this can be a little complicated, so I want to break it down into a few steps just to make sure you've got it. As a reminder, pause and try the examples when you're prompted, and there are free guided notes available. Also, if you could consider giving me a like or a comment or subscribing to my channel just to kind of support providing free math help for all, I would super appreciate it. Okay, so before we get started, you've got to know what the square root property is to understand this. So this is a review question. If you have no idea how to do this, look in the comments and I've got a link to how to use the square root property below. All right, so to do this, so you take the square root of each side, but we know that you have to take plus or minus. So then this will equal 2x plus 1 equals plus or minus 7. So I just have to break this off into its cases now. So let's start with, let's see, I'll break the first one over here. So 2x plus 1 equals positive 7. So if I solve this, so let's see, I'm running out of room here, but this will come out to x equals 3. And then the other case, 2x plus 1 equals negative 7. So if I go through and I just solve this one, so this is going to give me that x equals negative 4. So I have x equals 3 and x equals negative 4 as my two solutions. If this is totally foreign to you, then you are totally going to want to go back and watch how to do this. You've got to have this mastered to do the completing the square. All right, so now let's talk about how to complete the square. This is going to be weird. My first goal is to just get the basic steps in your system. So I'm giving you a caveat. This is not going to make any sense with what we're doing at first, but I'm trying to get the process kind of in your brain. And then I will make much greater sense of this later down the line. So please just go with me here. I've always found this is kind of like a nice middle step before we just jump into completing the square. All right. So completing the square, to start, we just want to get the process down. So we want to look at these expressions, view this as ax squared plus bx. So whatever's attached to the x squared is our a, whatever's attached to the x is our b. All we actually care about here is identifying the b. So if I am lining this up to this here, what is in that B position? That would be 6, right? So that's step 1. So in this case, my B equals 6. That's always your first step. Identify what your B is. The next step is to take half of B. So in this case, 1/2 of B, that's going to be what is 1/2 of 6? So that's equal to 3. Then you want to square this result. So you want to square whatever your 1/2 b was, you want to square it. So I'm going to have my 1/2 b squared in this case. That's going to be 3 squared, so that's going to equal 9. Then what I want you to do is, then I want you to add this to the problem, and this will be the part that makes no sense. So just go with me for a second. I'm trying to get you in a certain rhythm, and then we'll make way more sense of this down the line. So this is x squared plus 6x plus 9. And then what I want you to do is I want you to factor this as a perfect square. So what I mean in this case then is that I've got x squared plus 6x plus 9. This will factor as x plus 3 squared. Now one thing that I want to point out to you that is not a coincidence, this number here is always going to be whatever your half b was. So these things are always related. This will make more sense. I will kind of repeat this as we go along, but this is kind of the general idea. So I know this is a really weird exercise, but this whole thing of this little process here, this is really clutch for when you are trying to solve quadratics. So we want to kind of get in the rhythm of this. So I want to do another one with you. And now I'm just going to kind of compress the steps. So the way that this normally will look, so first you identify your b, so what's in the b position here? That would be the 8. Then you do half of b, so half of 8 would be 4. And then you'll do your half b squared, so what is 4 squared? That's 16. So now what I want to do, I want to take this 16 and I just want to add it to the end. So I've got x squared plus 8x, and now I want to add this 16. And now I want to factor this guy. So this guy factors as x plus 4 times x plus 4. So I can rewrite this whole thing as x plus 4 squared. So your goal is to actually just jump to this step. You don't need this step here. Now notice the other thing to point out, once again, this 4 and this 4, they always line up. It's always whatever your half b is. So you don't even have to think about how to factor this. It will always just be x plus whatever your half b is. This will be really, really handy later. So having all this detail, you might also be thinking, oh, why do I have to do all this? This is a roadmap, and I will totally convince you of why you need this in a few minutes. And so we are just trying, again, we're just getting in the rhythm of this, so just kind of keep going with the exercise. So I have 4 of these for you to try. So go ahead and give them a go and hit play when you're ready. So for this first one, so I'm going to go through those same steps again. So now my b here is actually negative, so it's negative 10. So then my half b is going to be negative 5. And then when I square that, this becomes positive again to positive 25. So this is what I want to add on the end. So now I'm going to have x squared minus 10x plus 25. And how will that factor? Well, this will factor as x minus 5 squared. Once again, pointing out, negative 5, that was our half b. So we're trying to get in a rhythm of this. So now I'm going to show you why this all matters and why this is helpful. So here's where things get a little tricky. So I'm going to do the same thing again. I get my b equals 3. And notice this time when I do my half b, this becomes a little unfortunate, right? Because we can't divide 3 and 2. So instead what you want to do, your best case will actually be to leave this as a fraction. So just write 3 over 2. So 3 times 1/2 is 3 over 2. Just leave it like that because it will make squaring this a lot easier. So if I square the top, 3 squared is 9, 2 squared is 4. Okay, so there's what I've got. So now, remember, I have to add this to the problem. So I get x squared plus 3x plus 9 over 4. Okay, how the heck does that factor? This is what I keep trying to bring up. This, you don't have to think about how is this going to factor. It's going to be x plus 3 over 2 squared. That's the whole point of making this little roadmap. If you get lost, you can always just refer to this, and this will be how this factors. So that's why you want to have all these steps here. All right, so we've got a couple more. X minus 1/2. So same thing, right? So now my b is going to be negative 1/2. So what would half of this be? Well, then you actually have to multiply 1/2 times negative 1/2. So this equals negative 1/4. And then my half b squared, I'm running out of room here. Well, if I square all that, that will become 1 over 16. All right, so now I'm going to add this to the end. So I get x squared, oops, I'm losing my coloring system here. I get x squared minus 1/2 x plus 1 over 16. And once again, I don't have to worry about how does this actually factor. I know how this factors. This will factor as x minus 1/4. I go and I look up at this piece here. So this is x minus 1 over 4 squared. Always works. You can totally always rely on this. This is why we make this map. It makes our lives a little bit easier. Okay, last one, and then we can finally move on and we can actually talk about how to use this. Okay, so now I've got b equals 2/3. So now my half b, so again, you might have to actually write this out for yourself. 1/2 times 2/3, this will equal 1/3. And then if I do my half b squared, this will equal 1/9. Okay, so once again, I'm going to add this piece to the end here. So I get x squared plus 2/3 x plus 1/9. And now I'm totally in the rhythm of doing this. This is x plus 1/3 squared. Always works out. Okay. So those little steps there, those are the keys that you need for actually completing the square. So now let's go back to an actual problem. So notice all of these other examples, maybe I'll just show you this. These aren't even equations, right? This was just me trying to show you kind of the steps for completing the square. But now this is kind of like the format. We've got it in our head what this looks like so that we can complete the square. So now I'm going to show you how do you actually complete the square on this true equation. So this is a little bit more of a complicated equation, but this will show you really everything that you need to do. So first step. So in this problem, so the leading coefficient, that's the number attached to the x squared. So here we have this issue, right? So 2x squared, this is not the leading coefficient that we need. So I'm going to rewrite the problem. And now I'm going to divide everything by 2 so that I can actually do what I need to do. So this will become now x squared plus 6x minus 8 equals 0. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2, now what you want to do is isolate all the terms that have an x in them to one side. So when I look at this equation here, really the only one that doesn't belong is the 8, so I just need to bring the 8 over to the other side. So now I want to rewrite this as x squared plus 6x equals positive 8. So I added the 8 over to this side. Maybe just to make that clear, I added the 8 over. Okay, so this is now what I've got. So now look at this. This is what we were doing actually in that exercise, right? So let me clear some space. And now you want to complete the square on this problem. So I need to complete the square on this part here. So using that part, my b is equal to 6, my half b is equal to 3, and my half b squared is equal to 9. So this 9 now has to keep the balance of the equation, it has to be added to each side. So the way that this is going to look is going to be x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 8 plus 9. So now we've ensured that this whole thing is going to remain balanced. And so now what I want to do is factor. So the right side, or sorry, the left side will become x plus 3 squared, and then the left side is just going to equal 17. Okay, so now we're in the home stretch. Looking at this, what does this look like? Well, now this actually looks like the square root property that we talked about at the beginning of the video. So let me clear some space again. And now we can solve using the square root property. So I've got x plus 3 squared equals 17. So if I take the square root of each side, so now I'm going to get x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 17. So then I can just subtract off the 3 to get x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 17. So as you can see, there's quite a few steps involved in this. So if you didn't write them all down, I do suggest in the guided notes actually you write all of this out. This can take a couple of tries to kind of get it. And you might be thinking, why would anybody use this? This seems so complicated. But if you think about it, this actually can't be factored. So even though, part of the reason this took so long is because I was writing out steps, but this is now a way to solve quadratic equations when they cannot be factored. So a lot of times when quadratic equations are first presented, it's either you can factor them or you can't. But the reality is that you could actually still solve them. It's just kind of a little messier, and you have to use something like completing the square or some other method. So let's try one more of these together, and I'll just kind of walk you through each step. So first things first, notice that we don't have to divide anything, right, in this case. So in the last one, we had to divide everything by 2. Here we have the leading coefficient that we want. So now we need to isolate the x's. So if you want to pause and go ahead and do that, and I'll do that too. So first I'm going to go ahead and add 6 to each side. So I've got x squared plus 4x equals 6. Next, you need to complete the square and add the 1/2 b squared to each side. So if you want to pause the video and do that and then check. So for my purposes, so my b here is 4, my half b is 2, and then my half b squared is 4. So I need to add this 4 here to each side. So I'm going to have x squared plus 4x, I'm going to add the plus 4, equals 6, and then once again, plus 4. Okay, so now if you're here, you should be able to simplify this side and then factor this side. So once again, hit play when you're ready. So this will factor as x plus 2 squared equals 10. So remember, this is always connected to whatever your half b is. And now you can use the square root property to finish this. So if you want to pause, hit play when you're ready. So I'll take the square root of each side. And so now this is going to be x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 10. So now I just finished solving for x. So I get that x equals -2 plus or minus the square root of 10. Maybe just one thing I want to mention. So if you're one of my students and you're taking a test, this is totally fine for the format. But if you're using like our homework system actually breaks this up. And some teachers actually want to see both the solutions. For me, just having the plus or minus is fine. But if you had to write it as the 2 solutions, it would be -2 plus the square root of 10, and x equals -2 minus the square root of 10. So part of that can just be preference. All right. So now I have just 2 more examples. These are like the basic examples, but this will give you a chance to now try completing the square entirely on your own, so you can hit play when you're ready. Okay, so notice in this one, I have x here and x squared here and 2x here. So I need these together, and I need the -5 on the other side. So I'm going to start by first subtracting off the -5 and then subtracting off the 2x. So now I get x squared minus 2x equals -5. So now I can go ahead and complete the square. So my b is equal to -2, my half b is equal to -1, and my half b squared is equal to +1. So now I need to add that +1 to each side. So I've got this, and I'll add the 1, and then this will be -5, and once again I'll add the 1. And so now from here I can go ahead and factor. So the left side now will factor as x minus 1 squared equals -4. And so now I'll take the square root of each side. So I take the square root here and the square root here. Remember, this is plus or minus. This is going to give me an imaginary number. So if you don't know how to work with those, I will drop a video in the comments of how to work with imaginary numbers. So this will be x minus 1 equals plus or minus 2i. And so then in the end, so if I just add 1 to each side, I'll get x equals 1 plus or minus 2i. And if you have to break that out into its 2 cases, then go ahead and do that. Okay. So this one's actually all set up for us, right? We already have the x's on one side. We have the leading coefficient that we want. So this one's all ready to go. So I can just go ahead and start completing the square. So I've got my b is equal to, not -4. My b is equal to -4. My half b is equal to -2. And my half b squared equals +4. So I need to add +4 to each side. So I've got x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 7. 7 plus 4. So then this will become x minus 2 squared equals 11. And so now I can take the square root of each side. So take the square root here, square root here. This is plus or minus. So now I get x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 11. I can't simplify that any farther. So I'll just add 2 to each side. And ultimately I get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 11. And again, break that up into two cases if you need to. All right, so that's kind of the gist, although I do have these next examples, so these are a little bit trickier, so you might want to pause the video and give them a try. This will require you to do things like multiplying and dividing before you even get started. Hit play when you're ready. Okay, so first things first, so here's that case where I don't have the leading coefficient that I want, so I have to divide everything by 2. So I'm just going to divide all parts of this guy by 2, so I get x squared minus 4x plus 6 equals 0. And I can go ahead and subtract off the 6. So I get x squared minus 4x equals negative 6. So let's see, now I can go ahead and complete the square. So my b is negative 4, my half b is negative 2, and my half b squared is positive 4. So now I can add that positive 4 to each side. And now I can factor. And now I can use the square root property. Notice I can't really do much to simplify that square root, so in the end, my final solution will be x equals 2 plus or minus I times the square root of 2. That's really as much as you can do with that one. Okay, so once again, for this one, I'm going to have to divide. So I'll divide everything by 3. And then you'll notice actually that this one's ready to go otherwise. So I've got x squared plus 5x equals negative 2. Although this is not divisible by 2, so this will be similar to some of the examples we were looking at earlier. So this will be a little trickier. So my b is equal to 5. And then remember, for your half b, just leave it in its fractional form. And that will make, when you square it, this will make it simpler. So 5 squared is 25, 2 squared is 4. So I do have to add that 25 over 4 now to each side. So I've got this x squared plus 5x plus 25 over 4 equals negative 2 plus 25 over 4. Now, I would recommend that you rewrite 2, this negative 2, rewrite it as an equivalent fraction over 4. So what's equivalent to negative 2 but now has a denominator of 4? This would actually be negative 8. Let's see, I'll rewrite this whole side. This will now be negative 8 over 4. If you divide 8 by 4, this equals negative 2, so I didn't change anything, but this will now allow me to actually combine these two fractions, right? So now, let's keep going. So if I do x plus 5 over 2, right, it's always this. That is going to allow me to factor this. And then this will equal, let's see, 17 over 4. Okay, so now let's go ahead and use the square root property. So take the square root here, square root here. So now I've got x plus 5 over 2 equals plus or minus. Notice that I can't take the square root of 17, so I'm just going to write this as the square root of 17. But I can take the square root of 4, right? So the square root of 4 is just 2. So this is the square root of 17 over 2. So now I can actually finish this by just subtracting off 5 over 2. So it's not the prettiest looking answer, but you don't have to really get your hands too dirty with the fractions, which I know sometimes stresses people out. So this would really be as far as you can go with this. You can't really combine it anymore, so you're good to go. Now for this last one, so notice that in this case I have a fraction here instead of like a whole number. So how do I get rid of the fraction in this case? Well, in this case then I'm actually going to multiply everything by 2. If I multiply this by 2, that will get rid of the fraction. So in this case I'm going to multiply, you can see that I'm just writing everything times 2. So this will allow me then to cancel out this fraction entirely. So now I'm left with x squared plus 6x minus 4 equals 0. And now we can proceed as usual. So I can go ahead and add the 4. Now I've got x squared plus 6x equals 4. And now the rest of this works like a typical problem. So my b here will be 6. my half b will be 3, and my half b squared is 9. So I'll add that 9 to each side. Now I'll factor. And now I can solve using the square root property. So I'll take the square root of each side. So I get x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 13. So my final answer will be x equals -3 plus or minus the square root of 13. So again, the whole thing about this is now this allows us to actually solve a lot more quadratics than we could before. And that actually sums it up. So I have some other videos on other ways that you can solve quadratics that you can check out. This one was just on completing the square. I will see you guys next time.